Hi, it's Louisa Dahl. And welcome to the Interactive Minds podcast, where I talk with passionate marketers, innovators, and digital leaders about their specific recipes for success. In today's show, I interview Aris Kinnas from Foxtel, talking about online experience optimisation. Here's 3 things you're going to learn: why personalisation needs to be central to the digital team, how to prioritise the tests you want to conduct, and what is an acceptable win rate for personalisation testing. Let's get into it. I'm excited to have Aris Kinnas here with me today. Aris spoke at the Interactive Minds Digital Summit in 2018, which is how we connected, and he has over 17 years' experience in leading digital transformations. Aris is the Director of Digital at Foxtel, where he heads up a team doing some impressive work with one of Australia's leading entertainment brands. Welcome to the show, Aris.
Thanks for having me, Louisa. I'm really excited to be talking to you today.
Excellent, me too. And you've definitely done some impressive work over the years. I'm really looking forward to getting into some of the detail around that today. But to start off with, you're the Director of Digital at Foxtel. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and remit?
Absolutely. So I'm responsible for the vision, roadmap, experience and performance of foxtel.com.au website and the My Foxtel app.
Excellent. And Foxtel's had, quite a few changes over the last years and had to evolve a little bit to stay current. Can you give us a little bit of an update on some of the highlights of what's been happening in Foxtel recently?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in the organisation for a year, so yeah, it's been a huge year at Foxtel, and we've recently launched the new IQ4 box experience, which guarantees a 4K satellite image to your TV. So that was quite a huge announcement, probably about a year ago.
Yep.
Since then, we've continued to work hard at making sure that we're bringing all the best TV and shows on demand all in one place. And we recently announced our big partnership with Netflix only last week. So that's huge for the industry. That's huge for Foxtel and Netflix coming together. And I think this marks the start of a new beginning moving forward, bringing two powerhouse brands together all in one place.
It's an exciting time to be in your role then.
Yeah, absolutely. It's never a dull moment. Always lots to do, especially with everything being digital these days. Everything we do has digital touch point, and so there's always lots of demands on the team.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I'm always fascinated to understand how organisations are structured around digital as well. So at Foxtel, what's the relationship between digital and marketing and how those teams work? Yeah,
absolutely. So the digital team actually sits within the sales and marketing team structure.
Mm-hmm.
So I report into Kieran, who's our Chief Marketing Officer. And so we're one of the key channels from an acquisition, from an engagement, from a retention perspective. So we play a part across the whole customer life cycle, and we work really well with the rest of my marketing peers and teams.
Awesome. And how big is the digital team at Foxtel?
So there's about 30 of us, and I think our marketing team has around about 100 odd people. So I'd say relatively large for the organisation. So we've got our fingers in a lot of pies.
Yeah, definitely. And you've had a lot of experience before Foxtel as well, which would be worth mentioning here, working at some of the largest banks in the country. What have been some highlight moments in your career so far?
Yeah, absolutely. My first 16 years in my career have been in financial services, the majority of that at Commbank and more recently at Westpac. With so many highlights. I think most of it has been around the ability to create new experiences and simplify things for customers. And I've done that throughout most of my career, even here at Foxtel. So picking up experiences, translating them into something digital, and then just making them simpler and easier for customers to get through. I always say that, in a digital world, you can have an idea in the morning, you can somewhat execute it during the day and have results by the afternoon and sort of know the impact that you've made. So
yeah, love it. That's a great saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now we're going to talk a little bit today about a specific project that you've worked on, particularly around experimentation and personalisation for Foxtel's customers, of course, but I know you've used the Adobe platform in this. So talk to us a little bit around this project and what was involved and where you started from.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big piece of work that we started probably late last year, and it was around making ourselves more relevant to customers and also focusing on the right experience for the right customers. Previously, what would happen when you came to the Foxtel site is that every customer or every user to the site had the same experience, whether you're a new customer, returning visitor, or an existing customer of ours. And so we obviously know that customers buy experiences, and the more personalised they are, the easier it is to make sure that customers are engaged. And so where we started from was pretty much from scratch. We didn't really have any expertise within the team. We didn't really have a program around experience optimization. We used to do it before I turned up, but it had stopped for a period of time. Mm. And so we really needed to re-establish that as a discipline within the team and find a way to create an operating model to start us on the journey.
Yeah, great. And look, I can imagine this is relevant to a lot of businesses who haven't yet achieved their desired level of personalisation. So where did you start with this when you realised that, this is a big project that needed to happen?
Yeah, so we started with the operating model. So we had the technology, we had the capability from a technical perspective. We then looked at hiring for the role. So we looked to change the job description of the analytics team to make it broader and focus on that as a skill set. And because we were relatively small and starting from scratch, I also looked at partnering with an external vendor who had proven expertise in scaling and helping build out personalization programs. So bringing some of those things together, and then also the ideas of what we needed to do. And we always start with basics. You want to be able to crawl before you can walk and run. Mm. We started with simple ideas around testing call to action buttons and words and the like, just to get ourselves used to using the technology, going through the process, and making sure all the parts were coming together. So we started really, really slowly just to sort of prove out that we could do it within Fox.
Okay, so what you covered there actually covers a lot though. So let me delve into that a little bit more. And you said you already had the platform in place. So as I mentioned before, we're talking about the Adobe platform here. So you had that in place but weren't really using it to its potential. Is that what the situation was at that point? Before
my time, we had a team and people focused on personalization and using those Adobe tools. And by the time I turned up, we'd lost that skill set and weren't really focused on that as a discipline. So we were lucky enough to be in the position to have the tools, but we didn't actually have anyone able to use them. So that's where we were starting from.
Yeah. And did you have to get buy-in from across the organisation to proceed with this project in the first place?
So that's an interesting question. On the basis that we were already paying for the tool, we just weren't using it. So what we did was re-establish and start talking to the rest of the organisation about some of the ideas and some of the things that we were looking to do. Mm-hmm. So that part wasn't difficult, notwithstanding that in a lot of organisations or with a lot of people that might be a challenge.
Yeah, because typically it involves quite a large investment initially, doesn't it?
Yeah, correct. As I said, our starting point was that the investment had already been made and we were already paying for the tool, and therefore it was a slightly easier conversation to say we're picking this up and continuing versus talking to a group of people trying to convince them to invest and start from scratch.
Yeah, definitely. And when you started this as a project, what kind of outcomes were you aiming to achieve?
Yeah, so from an outcome perspective, we were looking to drive a number of things. We were looking to drive a conversion uplift. So there's a lot of data that says on average personalization programs drive, 10 to 15% uplift in conversion and therefore sales. We're also looking to drive increased number of proportion of traffic that saw personalized experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So we were at 0 and wanted to get to 25% by the 30th of June. And those are, I guess, our first two real key metrics that we wanted to focus on. The other one was to prove that our processes worked, our operating model worked, and how our internal and external teams would work together to get the campaigns up and running.
Yeah, great. And when was it that you started this project? You said that goal was for June. What month was it when you were kind of making these plans?
Yeah, so we were thinking and talking about it back in probably October 2018, and we officially kicked off in November 2018.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so then you identified some resources to get involved. Both you said they're both internally and also externally to lead you on the way. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and then what happened? So what was the kind of time frame and steps going from getting those resources on board, and as you said, kind of mapping out some goals? What was next?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we needed to do. First of all was create some ideas and a plan of attack on what we would do first and how we would do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then also we needed to train our internal resource to get them to a level where they would be able to create the campaigns and produce the campaigns. And then we also stress tested what the process should be, having spoken about it and just worked through a live example to make sure that our QA process, that our checklists were in place to make sure that anything that went live didn't break anything else. And we obviously had our proper legal and compliance approvals in place to ensure that whatever we were putting up on the website wasn't going to break anything or blow up in our face. So that really took a couple of weeks to get us into that position before we decided to turn on our first test. Having done programs like this before, it's quite you do want to run it 100 miles ahead, but you do. I had to sort of slow myself down and reassess the maturity of the internal people, the maturity of our processes, and make sure that we went at the pace that suited the organisation and not at a pace that you want to be at, having worked at other places. So that was a key learning for me to be patient and go through the motions.
Yeah, definitely. And as with projects of this nature, they are very reliant on data being pulled in as well. What sources were you using to pull in data to inform your personalisation?
Yeah, so we've got quite a few data points, as I'd assume a lot of organisations do. So we use the Adobe suite of products, and we have access to our Adobe Analytics web measuring tools. So we look at a whole lot of leading and lagging indicators around visits, demand, application starts and completes, how many people start the application from the landing page. And so all of those metrics, and through our process, we've identified what are the soft metrics that we want to measure, but also what are the hard metrics we want to measure. I've always said in these programs that you should be measuring the end goal, which is a sale or a conversion event, versus click-throughs and metrics that are higher up in the funnel, on the basis that unless you get the end result, your personalization program isn't really driving an outcome if it hasn't completed or if it hasn't ended up in a sale or a conversion event. So that's where I skew and the focus of the teams. And we always look at data on a hourly basis, which is good and bad, because sometimes you can jump at shadows if you look at data too often. And you do have to, once again, wait to make sure you get statistical significance so that you're not chopping and changing and making decisions based on incomplete data.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess that's an important point to talk about here, is that it is not just about getting the data, but then being able to make a decision based on what you're seeing. You said there you need to get enough usage in order to make those decisions. What do you call enough?
Yeah, so there's a number of tools that you can use to figure out whether you've seen enough data or not. So we try to forecast the amount of traffic that will go through the experiences and then the conversions so that we can forecast how long the test will run for. We typically see results in less than a week, and sometimes, depending on the experiment and the complexity, it might take 2 to 3 weeks. So at the moment, for example, we've launched a new sales funnel experience, and we've also revamped some of our sales journey recently. And so we've been testing that for about a week, and we're still working through the data, the insights, the hypothesis of what's working, what's not working. And that example being a larger test will mean that we'll be probably running that for about 3 months to make sure that we really understand exactly what's working and what's not working, versus your simple A/B tests around call to action buttons, for example, or images, where you might get a result in less than a week.
Wow, 3 months is a long time though in the world of digital, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why we need to ensure that we're measuring, that we're focusing on the right tests and experiments. And that's only because there's an opportunity cost. If you're not looking to prioritize your campaigns, you might be stuck in an experiment that might not be adding lots of value for a very long time, and you don't want to lock up those assets from a experimentation perspective. So you absolutely need to work through and prioritize the ideas to make sure you're going with the ones that are going to drive the biggest value first.
How do you prioritize those? I mean, you just said, of course, biggest value, but there must be a massive range of things that you would like to know and be able to improve. Have you got a process in place for prioritizing those?
Absolutely. We have a prioritization process in place. We look at the opportunity size. So how big is the traffic coming to that part of the page or section or part of the site. We then also look at the complexity of the experiment and the personalized journey. We also then look at how long that experience and test will run, so we can understand how long we're locking up that asset. And we also look at the expected outcome from a revenue and subscription perspective. And so that gives us a score, and so we then sort of rank our experiments and campaigns based on those scores. And then it's almost like, from an agile ways of working perspective, you've always got a list of things to work on, and whenever there's new ideas, we rescore and re-rank things, and then we're always picking up the top items within our prioritized list of experiments to do. And then there's always times where people come up with other ideas, or the campaign that we're running at the moment, for example, might not be getting the results we need. And so there'll be fresh ideas that come into the into our processes that we need to then reevaluate and figure out which ones we do first.
Yeah. It sounds all very complicated, but I know you do this with a small team. Can you tell us what your team looks like at this point that's kind of involved in these types of experiments and data and decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is a relatively small team. So we do have one person using the Adobe Target tool, and we do have one person on the analytics side. And then we do have, as I said, our external vendor that helps us. They help us more so from a framework and scale perspective. So they've enabled us and built out the Adobe Target components in a way that we can launch many campaigns on a given day without slowing us down. So the external vendor, we don't have access to 2 or 3 or 4 people that are punching out campaigns for us. All these campaigns are done by the team internally. They just help us with the framework to make sure that we can build them as quickly as we humanly can.
Yeah, right. And how much is the rest of the team impacted by this project? Is it something that's kind of fairly central to how you work in digital now at Foxtel, or is it kind of run on the side?
Absolutely. It's central in the way that we work, and communication is a big challenge in a lot of organizations, notwithstanding within our own team. So because my team also has a group of digital producers that are changing things on the website, and I've got a group of digital designers that are building new experiences and driving customer journeys. We need to be able to communicate not only to our own team but to the rest of our marketing and product colleagues what we're doing and which pages we're experimenting in, so that we don't break experiences and we don't create any collisions. So we do have to talk to, as you would expect, and communicate with a large stakeholder group, A, to make sure nothing breaks, but B, also to help people understand the work that we're doing. So one of the key rules from a marketing perspective when you're running a campaign, a big above-the-line campaign, is you want consistency of message, and you want to ensure that all your different channels are pretty much saying the same things in the same manner. The added opportunity for us when we personalize and test and do our experiments is that we're able to play around with the words or play around with the order or call out something more than something else. And then we're feeding that back to our marketing colleagues to give them that feedback to see whether or not they want to make those changes also off-site and in other channels. So it's a big piece of work around communicating and keeping everyone across what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Yeah, definitely. Now, we have jumped forward to kind of current time in terms of this, but if I can take you back for a moment. So you mentioned that you started this project late in 2018. At what point were you able to kind of start running the experiments and start personalising with this project?
So we were able to start running the experiments and personalising a couple of weeks after we had people trained, work through our processes, work through the assets and the experiments that we're going to start running with. So we started quite simply with changing call to action buttons, get Foxtel, get package, were a couple of the early experiments that we ran. And those are iterative. The thing with personalisation and testing is it never actually stops. I usually say that it's somewhat like painting the harbour bridge. The story I was told as a kid was that they've got to keep painting the harbour bridge so it doesn't rust. So by the time you get to one side, you've got to go back and do it again and keep going again. So that's the thing with testing, whether it's images, value proposition, or your call to action buttons. I mean, there's thousands of permutations and combinations, and you don't really stop testing those in any environment.
Yeah. And how many tests do you think you would have run since it's been up and running?
Yeah, so since it's been up and running, we've run more than 150 experiments, which is quite a large number for a very small team. And we've personalised the visits. So we've personalised about 25% of our visitor journeys, which is what we were aiming to do. So that was really good from our perspective, and we were even acknowledged earlier in the year in the 2019 Adobe Summit Awards. We were a finalist in one of the categories there, and that was back in February, March. So really in the infancy of the program, we were being acknowledged as finalists in global awards. So that was really exciting to see how quickly we were able to progress and make some big differences to our own performance and the experiences that our customers were seeing.
Yeah, fantastic. 25% is a great target that you've reached, obviously. And what about beyond that in terms of how it's impacted to some of those other metrics, the bottom line ones that you care about?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been consistently able to drive 15% incremental increase in conversion and sales since we've kicked off.
Great.
Which is great. So it's probably at the upper end of the material that you would read. And that's because there's a piece around personalization, which, as I said, it's around scale. So first of all, you want it to be effective. You want to make sure that the tests and the experiments that you're running or the personalized journeys that you're driving are effective. And by that means we measure how many tests won and how many tests failed. So I always say that there's enough material on the internet these days to sort of know what kind of things you should be testing. And I tend to say you should be skewing towards a 60% win rate. Mm-hmm. Although when you read the literature, you know, a lot of people say if you're only winning 30 or 40% of the time, that's pretty good. But I have a different point of view. The other piece around that from a personalisation perspective then becomes reach. So you can often get great results through personalising and experimenting with a small proportion of traffic. And so that's why that key metric around how much of our website traffic we're able to personalise becomes really important, because if you're only personalising 1% of the traffic and you're getting a 10% sales uplift, well then that's only a very, very small number being impacted from the bottom line. But if you can get to 25 or 50% of customers that come to the website having a personalised experience, and then if you can drive a 10% better outcome, then you're starting to make a larger impact to your bottom line, your conversions, your sales, your upgrades, your upsells, whatever you're trying to drive. So there's a really important piece around driving effective campaigns and experiments, and then also driving that through reach so that you can get the right outcomes from a scale perspective.
Yeah, definitely. And where do you want to get to from that perspective, given that you're at about 25% now? Have you got kind of aims to increase that?
Yeah, absolutely. We want to double that again and move to about 50% of our journeys and do it consistently across the My Foxtel app as well. So what we want to do is make sure that our existing customers get the right experience that enables them to see recommendations and about shows and things like that. So that means we're looking to ingest information from our other source systems to make sure there's consistency across, their set-top box experience, their streaming device experience, and hooking that into the website as well. But we're also then looking to make sure that we're retargeting effectively prospects off-site and on-site, so tying that together so that it's one complete digital journey and not just a journey that happens when you jump on the website.
So it sounds very much like a data story here, and you need to kind of pull in some more data in order to be able to personalise to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking to use a lot more data and a lot more channels. So, extending it into our EDM channels, into display, search, both on-site and off-site from a search perspective, and also then looking to use third-party data to be able to enrich the information that we already have. So you can use, we use Experian from that perspective to get additional data about our customers and segments and prospects, so that we can overlay that to make the messaging more focused on that segment. So an example there is around an experiment that we did last year was around focusing on families and slightly changing the message to say, how about a weekend in with Foxtel? And we saw that drove a 20% higher conversion when we changed that message to be a little bit more specific to families. And we changed the imagery as well and had some kids shows and some documentaries and things like that with the messaging. And we definitely saw an increase in our conversion compared to the default.
Yeah, interesting. What have been some other things? Are you able to share any maybe things that you didn't expect that you've learned out of this process of personalisation?
I'll start broad and then be a bit more specific. So having come from financial services where we've run a lot of experiments and done a whole lot of personalisation, the trap potentially for us was to say that what works in one industry will work in the other, and that's definitely not been true. So I think that's been one of the the learnings, which sort of seem logical now, but it didn't seem so when we were going through the process. One of our offers earlier in the year was to give away a free TV, and so with our TV packs, it was a 32-inch Hisense TV, and it was, I think, valued at about $300. So automatically people thought, oh, great, we should just give that to everyone, because, of course, if you had the choice of a free TV or no free TV, more people would take up the free TV. But I was a little bit more cautious and said, well, let's start off with 20% of the traffic, seeing that experience and see how we go. Turned out to be the right call, because when we first launched that experiment, in the first 2 or 3 days, the free TV experience actually converted a lot worse than not giving away a free TV, which didn't make sense to everyone, right? So we rejigged where we put that message in on the sales landing page and actually made it more prominent. What we found was that we added, in the first instance, the words just to a whole lot of other words, and customers were missing that. So when we made it more prominent and it featured more, that's when we actually saw the free TV experience take off. And so that's where we had about a 30% higher conversion off the back of that free TV offer once we got that messaging hierarchy correct.
Yeah, and that's a great story, isn't it? Because I think, if you take that at face value, you might have completely changed the offer altogether, rather than delving in and looking at the why and rejigging it to make it work.
Yeah, that's correct, and that's partly back to my earlier comments, not jumping at shadows and making the wrong decisions, and to that point that you've got to continuously optimize, and like painting the harbour bridge, you've got to keep going until you get it right, because that should work naturally. Yeah, is the intuition, and sometimes if it doesn't, you've got to think, well, what is it? Why is it? What's the hypothesis? How do you work through it? And then we came up with a much better layout and design, and you look at it now and you go, that just makes sense. But as we're going through it, we were scratching our heads.
Yeah. Yeah. So would you say that your team, and I suppose the digital team as a whole, has more of a test and learn kind of inbuilt approach now than perhaps they did before this was available?
Absolutely. I think that's definitely the approach and the culture of the team. I think it's easier in a digital environment because we do have the tools, and there's a lot of tools these days, whether it's from Google or Adobe or Optimizely. There's a lot of tools out there that enable you to be able to do that. So it's changed the way that teams work, and it's definitely changed the way that we work. I think part of it is also then encouraging the culture of people coming up with ideas and pushing the boundaries and questioning things and trying to find ways to do things differently. I think there's two parts to that, as there always is. The technology in itself won't do anything, and that's a good example. As I said, we had the capability, we had the tools, but we didn't have the people skilled to actually do anything with it. So you do need the people with the right background skills. You do want people to be inquisitive. You do want people to want to problem solve, and that then brings good technology and good people together to be able to make some of these things work.
Yeah. And how has that impacted marketing's relationship with the rest of the organisation or stakeholders that you might need buy-in from? Has that impacted how you work?
Absolutely. So what we find more and more is people wanting to understand what experiments we've run and how that can help them inform some of the decisions they're looking to do with new product launches and new approaches that they're thinking about. So it's definitely a lot more collaborative. We're all talking the same language. We're all wanting to know what experiments are running and how they're performing, and when can we share those insights so they can actually learn from them as well to help them with their own decisions that they need to make. So I think it's a great opportunity and a great conversation starter to be able to bring these things together.
How do you store all that information? Obviously, after 150 campaigns or tests, you've got a lot of data there. How do you make that easily accessible for people to check what's been done in the past and to access those learnings?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's one that we always struggle with, and we've struggled even in my previous organisation. So it's a curse to, and also a great problem to have with all those experiments and all those learnings. As you scale and as you do more and more of them, it's a lot harder to remember and recall what was tested, what was the result. So we do have a Jira process, and I've forgotten the word. Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry, Confluence. We do have a Confluence page which captures and summarizes the experiments. So what the experiment hypothesis was, what the default and experience B and C, etc., look like, and then some of the results. So that's quite manual at the moment, and we're looking at different tools that can help automate some of that stuff. So to create a workflow process which then captures some of that data and information, and then allows you to be able to search based on keywords and things like that. So that's a work in progress. I don't think we've cracked that one yet, and that's one I've been trying to solve as a leader across multiple organizations. And I think that some of the tools that we're looking to use and experiment with might actually help bridge the gap to share those learnings more broadly than our own team, and do it systematically.
Yeah, great. Now, in terms of what's next for your project here, what's ahead for you guys? You mentioned you're going to increase the amount of personalisation that you can offer on your website. Any other kind of areas that you're looking at testing or moving into?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned earlier that we're currently testing our new sales funnel and our new sales journey experience. So that's one of the key ones that we're running at the moment, and only kicked off last week. So that will run for a period of time, and that's some really big decisions there, because we actually now have 2 site versions running, 2 sales funnel versions running, and that creates a lot of anxiety, because that actually duplicates the amount of work that the producers and our analytics people and a whole raft of people from a technology perspective have to track and make sure both things are working. So that's a real big focus of ours to get the data, to look at the insights and make sure we're clear about what's working, what's not working, make the adjustments, continuously improve, and as we become comfortable, make those bold decisions and calls to turn off parts of the old site and funnel and move everything to the new one. So that's one of the big ones at the moment. We're also then looking at how do we work more closely with our customer marketing team, so that we can start remarketing through our data segments for customers that have started their I guess their purchasing journey with us but haven't completed them. We do targeting if those customers come back to the website, but we're looking to extend that into email, SMS, and offsite as well. So those are some bigger ones that we're looking to drive there. And then we're also, as a big piece of work, looking to start experimenting and personalising our My Foxtel app journeys as well. So there's a lot of opportunity there to once again give customers the right experience and the right content that's actually configured to their recommendations and packs and needs.
Yeah, still a lot of scope.
Yeah, absolutely. There's it's never done. Much like your roadmap and your continuous improvement and the features of your products are never quite done, because if you're sort of done, you become stale and potentially irrelevant. But there's always, as with everything, one of those classic economic problems. There's lots of ideas and not enough time to do them in. So there's definitely lots to do.
Yeah, and you outlined before some great ways to prioritize those as well, which is perfect. And look, I mean, from what I can see, you've achieved a lot in the 18 months or so since this got up and running. So well done. That's an amazing achievement.
Great. Thank you very much.
Now, if someone else is considering kind of embarking on a project like this, do you have some recommendations that you'd be able to share, some starting points or things that they must consider? What would you advise?
Absolutely. And I guess it depends on the size of the organisation and the size of the investment required. You can always start small and experiment and talk to smaller vendors, or can you use free tools and start to show that there's some value there before you get a large chunk of money and invest into the process. I've obviously come from large organisations, so that using free tools doesn't really fit within the remit of the organisation. So we do need industrial strength tools, and so in a larger organisation, there's a whole piece around coming up with the idea, talking to stakeholders, executives to get buy-in, working through a business case to secure funding and prove out and make some assumptions around what this might drive from a ROI perspective. But I think the best thing to do is, if you're thinking about these things, is I always go talk about there's convincing the organisation that you need to do it, and part of that sometimes is asking for forgiveness rather than permission if the investment is small enough and within your delegation. But if it's a larger investment, you do definitely need people to buy into the vision that you have, and there's lots of groups out there that talk about conversion rate optimization and personalisation. There's lots of forums. There's lots of literature out there for people to be able to use studies and examples of what other organisations have done. And depending on who your vendor might be, they can arrange times and conversations with other customers of theirs. So we do that, and I've done that at my previous organisations, where there's someone considering the Adobe suite of tools, and we'll have a conversation about some of the challenges, some of the things that worked, how we went about doing it. So there's a lot of sharing to help other people and other organisations get the best out of the potential tools that they're looking to invest. But I do think it's dependent on the environment that you're in and the size of the organisation that you're in.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a big difference, doesn't it, in terms of the investment and the outcomes that you're going to be able to achieve from it as well.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing all this detail today with us, Aris. It's been really great to have you on the show. How can people connect with you if they'd like to touch base?
Absolutely. It was great talking to you as well, Louisa. So I'm available on LinkedIn, Aris Kinnas, or aris.kinnas@foxtel.com.au if people want to reach out.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And thanks again for being on the show.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, please remember to subscribe. My recommended action item from today's show is to look at what other organisations are using the software and approach that you want to use, and reach out and talk to them. It's a great way to understand the pros and cons and what you can expect. Please join me in the Interactive Minds Facebook group, where I do weekly lives and the marketing industry connects. You can access today's show notes at interactiveminds.com/podcast. See you next week.